quiet bench, an old man, and a cop with something to prove. When Officer Darren Cole approached 79-year-old Elijah Brooks at Clearwater Park, he thought he saw an easy target. Just another black man to push around. What he didn't know was, Elijah wasn't just sitting. He was standing for decades of dignity. And watching from the shadows was someone powerful enough to bring the whole system crashing down. This isn't just a story about profiling. It's about justice that walks with a cane, but strikes like thunder. Stick around, because what happens next turns one city upside down. Clearwater Park was the kind of place where people came to forget. Tucked between quiet neighborhoods and lined with magnolia trees, it was meant to be an escape, a slice of calm in a world spinning too fast. That morning, the air smelled of damp grass and coffee. Children squealed near the swings. Joggers traced the winding paths. And at the center of it all, Elijah Brooks sat still as stone, reading his newspaper and feeding crumbs to pigeons that circled like old friends. He had sat on that same bench nearly every day for the past 20 years. Same cane by his side. Same slow, thoughtful movements. Same quiet presence. But this time, the air carried something else, something colder. It arrived on the heels of a police cruiser, tires crunching against gravel, sunlight gleaming off polished metal like a warning. Officer Darren Cole stepped out like he owned the place. New transfer, fresh uniform, and eyes trained on Elijah like a target. He saw a black man alone in a mostly white neighborhood and filled in the rest with suspicion. That was the problem with power in the wrong hands. It didn't need reasons, just assumptions. Elijah looked up slowly as the shadow fell across him. He recognized the stance immediately. Wide legs, one hand resting casually on the holster, the other flexing as if itching to assert control. He had seen it before. Back in '65, outside a diner in Montgomery. Again in '72, when he was hauled in for loitering outside a voting center. And again, now, decades later, like time had looped back to prove it never really moved forward. "Morning," the officer said, voice clipped. Elijah nodded. "Morning." Cole's smile was tight, forced. "Can I ask what you're doing here, sir?" "I'm reading the paper. Enjoying the morning. Like I do every day." Cole's eyes swept over the scene like it didn't make sense. Coffee cup. Satchel. Newspaper. It was all too normal. Too innocent. And something in him didn't like it. "You live around here?" Elijah took a breath. 3 blocks down. 42 years. "Got any ID on you?" The question hit like a slap. Elijah didn't flinch. "No, officer. Don't carry my license when I take a walk." "Never needed to." Cole's jaw twitched. His tone sharpened. "Maybe you should." The tension thickened, invisible but suffocating. Around them, life continued unaware. But Elijah knew. He'd been here before. This wasn't about a park or a policy. It was about presence. His presence. His right to be. And from across the park, just beyond the trees, someone was watching. A man in a dark hoodie. Still. Quiet. Waiting. Elijah didn't know it yet, but that stranger would change everything. Because this wasn't going to be just another morning. Not this time. For a moment, it was just the two of them, an old man with a cane and a cop with something to prove. Elijah Brooks straightened his back, folding his newspaper with the same care he gave everything in life. His fingers, curled slightly with age, smoothed the creases. He placed it beside him on the bench, never breaking eye contact with the officer. "I'll ask again," Cole said, this time louder. "Do you have ID?" Elijah's voice was calm, but each word carried weight. "Unless I'm suspected of a crime, I have no legal obligation to show you anything." A quiet beat passed. Cole's face darkened. He wasn't expecting a lecture in civil liberties. Not from someone his grandfather's age. Not from someone who should have just nodded and complied. "Sir, you're loitering," he snapped, his hand drifting toward his belt. "That's grounds for removal." Elijah didn't move. He had lived through hoses and dogs, through curfews and beatings, through the hollow promises of change. He wasn't about to be bullied off the bench he'd earned with blood and time. "I'm sitting, drinking coffee, reading the paper, like I do every Tuesday, Thursday, and Sunday." Cole stepped closer. His boots flattened the grass in sharp, heavy stomps. His shadow fell across Elijah, longer and heavier now, like a threat. He lowered his voice, laced it with venom. "You're resisting, you know that?" "No," Elijah said evenly. "I'm remembering." Cole blinked. "Excuse me?" Elijah's voice didn't rise, but it echoed all the same. "I'm remembering the marches I walked. The friends I buried. The promises this country made to us that it's still late delivering. So no, officer, I'm not resisting. I'm standing my ground, even if I'm sitting. Around them, the park began to notice. A jogger slowed to a stop, earbuds out. A young mother near the playground frowned, holding her child a little closer. A few phones were raised, cameras quietly rolling. Cole saw them. He saw the attention shifting. And it only made him angrier. Stand up, he barked. Elijah didn't move. I said stand up. Now. The words hung there, vibrating with unspoken threat. Across the park, the man in the hoodie stood slowly, his hands visible, his eyes locked on the scene unfolding. And then he began walking. Not fast, not aggressive, just deliberate. Elijah finally rose, not because he was told to, but because he chose to. His knees cracked as he lifted himself upright, cane planted like a flag in the soil. You want me gone, officer? Elijah asked, voice low, but unshakable. You're gonna have to take me. And for the first time, Darren Cole hesitated. He didn't know it yet, but the ground was shifting beneath his feet. And the man in the hoodie was getting closer. The park had gone quiet. Not silent, not still, but quiet in the way an audience quiets just before the curtain falls, or right before lightning splits the sky. Officer Cole's hand hovered near his radio. Elijah stood firm, cane rooted in the soil, his posture straight with defiance and memory. Around them, more people were watching now. A quiet ripple of attention spread like the rings from a stone dropped in still water. And then the man in the hoodie stepped forward. He didn't shout. He didn't raise a fist. He simply said, Officer, that's enough. Cole turned, jaw tight. Move along. This is a police matter. The man didn't move. He simply held his ground, eyes steady. No, he said. I think I'll stay right here. Cole's nostrils flared. You interfering with law enforcement? The man's reply was a slow, measured reach into the pocket of his jacket. Cole's hand jumped to his sidearm, tension snapping through the air like a whip. But what came out of the man's pocket wasn't a weapon. It was a leather wallet. He flipped it open with practiced ease. The gold glint of a federal badge caught the light. Deputy Attorney General Nathaniel Chambers, he said, loud enough for the growing crowd to hear. United States Department of Justice. For a moment, Officer Cole didn't move. His face didn't even twitch. But his grip loosened, almost imperceptibly. Elijah, still standing, blinked in surprise. His eyes narrowed, processing what he'd just heard. This wasn't a journalist. Wasn't a bystander. Wasn't even a city official. This was someone far, far above Cole's pay grade. You're interfering with an investigation, Cole tried to recover, but his voice had lost some of its edge. There is no investigation, Nathaniel replied. There's only an abuse of authority. And it's over. Right now. Cole looked around, really looked. At the phone's recording. At the dog walker watching nervously. At the old man he'd grabbed by the arm like he was nothing. And then back at the badge, still held out like a mirror. Nathaniel's voice dropped lower, colder. Let go of him. Now. Cole's hand, still latched to Elijah's elbow, finally unclenched. Elijah stepped back, breathing heavy, the muscles in his jaw tight. But he didn't look at Cole. He looked at Nathaniel. You always just sit in parks waiting for things to break? Elijah asked, voice dry. Nathaniel gave the ghost of a smile. Only when I know they've already been breaking for years. He turned to the crowd, to the cameras, to the story already writing itself. Elijah Brooks, he said, addressing him by name, without ever having asked. You all right? Elijah straightened, then nodded. I will be. And with that, the park, once just a patch of green in Charleston, became the epicenter of a storm no one saw coming, but that had been building for decades. It didn't take long for the ripples to become waves. By sunset, footage of Elijah's confrontation with Officer Cole had gone viral. Every angle, from cell phone recordings to bodycam footage, was dissected on nightly news and lit up every social feed. People didn't just see a frail old man wronged in a public park. They saw themselves, their fathers, their fears, their fury. But what they hadn't seen, what no one had seen until now, was what came next. The very next morning, Elijah was asked to come downtown. Not to the station this time. To the federal building. And Nathaniel was waiting. I need you to see something, he said simply, leading Elijah into a cold, windowless conference room. On the table lay a file. Thick. Heavy. Laced with decades of dust. Inside were complaints. Dozens of them. Some old, yellowed with time. Others recent. All filed against the same department, Clearwater Division of Charleston PD. Racial profiling. excessive force, unlawful detainment, harassment, and worse, far worse. Many of the complaints had been lost in transition, buried by bureaucracy, silenced by signatures. This wasn't just one officer, Nathaniel said. It's a culture, and it's been protected. Elijah's hands gripped the edge of the table. You mean to tell me, he said slowly, voice edged with heat, that all of this was known? That people were hurt, ignored, and nothing happened? Nathaniel met his gaze. We needed evidence. Public evidence. A reason to pull the thread without political backlash. Elijah slammed the file shut. And you let me be that reason. Silence. The air between them heavy with truth. Yes, Nathaniel said finally. Because you're trusted. Because they'll listen to you. Because when a man like you gets mistreated, the nation pays attention. Elijah didn't speak. Didn't move. The fire in his chest burned, too hot for words. But later that evening, when he returned to his neighborhood, everything had changed. Neighbors stood on porches waiting for him. Some offered hugs. Others just nodded, silently saying, We saw. We know. We're with you. A local pastor called him that night. They're organizing a town hall, he said. People want answers. And they want you there. Elijah stared at the cracked ceiling of his living room, voice gravel-deep with weariness. I didn't ask for this. No, the pastor replied gently. But it's asking for you. So Elijah said yes. Not because he wanted the spotlight, but because he'd seen what happened when no one stood in it. And when the town hall filled to the brim, overflowing into the sidewalks, Elijah walked to the mic, slow but steady, cane tapping like a gavel against the tiled floor. My name is Elijah Brooks, he said. And I've been quiet for too long. What followed wasn't just a speech. It was the start of a reckoning. Because when the system cracks, it's not enough to point at the rot. You have to dig it out, root and all. And Elijah? He had a lifetime's worth of digging to do. The first town hall became the second. Then the third. By the time the fourth rolled around, they were meeting in a converted gymnasium because the church basement could no longer hold the crowd. What started as one man's stand in a park had become a movement, and Elijah Brooks, stoic, weary, wise, had become something more than a victim. He had become a symbol, a reminder, a call. But symbols alone don't change systems. So Elijah got to work. He met with city council members, school boards, business owners. He shook hands with those who once crossed the street to avoid him. He spoke plainly, without malice, but with purpose. You either help fix it, he'd say, or you help it stay broken. Nathaniel kept his promise too. Federal oversight wasn't just a press release. It came with teeth. By the end of the month, several senior officers had been removed. Policies rewritten. Mandatory bias training introduced. But Elijah pushed further. Change isn't a policy, he reminded them in every meeting. It's behavior. And it starts with listening. So they listened. To mothers whose sons had been stopped for walking too slow. To grandfathers who had been frisked for leaning on the wrong car. To teenagers who didn't want to march, but didn't want to be afraid either. Slowly, the city began to shift. And then came the vote. A new civilian oversight board. With real power. Real teeth. The measure passed in a landslide. And when they asked who should sit on it, the answer rang out before the question finished. Elijah Brooks. He said no. I'm not the only one who's earned that seat, he told them. Put someone younger. Someone who will be here long after I'm gone. I'll stand behind them. But they'll lead. So they did. And when the first meeting of the new board was called, Elijah sat quietly in the back row, hands folded on his cane, watching a 28-year-old woman call the room to order with the same fire that had once fueled his marches. One afternoon, months later, Elijah returned to the park. Alone this time. No cameras. No speeches. Just an old man, and the bench where it all began. A small plaque had been installed nearby. Simple words etched in bronze. For those who sat when they were told to stand, and stood when they were told to disappear. Clearwater Park remembers. He sat, coffee in hand, and looked out over the grass where children now played freely. No stares. No questions. Just laughter and light. A man passing with his son stopped, smiled, and said, "Thank you." Elijah smiled back, then looked out at the horizon. He knew there would always be another battle. Another Darren. Another system that needed tearing down or building up. But for now, for this quiet moment, Charleston was breathing easier. And Elijah Brooks? He was finally at peace. Not because the work was done, but because this time, it would carry on without him.